Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in to Entelocius. My name is Paul. The most obvious geographical position is the Matryoshka doll. It is self-relevant, protective, and vexed. The Matryoshka doll is like a photo in the mirror, recursive to its final, unfinished stage, just as a geographical is like a self-addressed envelope or an internal document. The geographical is named and self-proclaimed, meaning respectively autoerotic and indeterminate, without its nosology, and thus is firstly desirous of itself. However, the geographical is also an additional game, the Three Cups game, wherein the Matryoshka doll is isolated and solicited into its layers within an existing permuting act. The Matryoshka doll is inherently influential and behavioral, meaning to say it is perfectly self-sufficing to the extent of its configurable vicissitudes, and for this reason it is also inconsiderate. You might agree geographies practice disconsideration, perhaps even flagrant renunciations of within-stance commitments. Geographies do not possess any but the most projective causes: exportation and importation, strategic horizons, pains of participation, virtual panic, and so rhizomatically speaking, they are mute. If the rhizome is to be seen, geographies are too busy already in their peculiar vantage, and their eyes are occupied fleetingly like transportation. Because they are irrumpant, portentous, and relatively seasonal, geographies are like conspicuous embellishments of the rhizome, like its bows or its ties. The bow bespeaks the cause, the tie the hour. Since the machinic comment of classification submerges a dynamic question, geographical classifications have minimal relevance. Yet there are indeed two exceptional places on the map, namely, here and around here. This is both the consensus and the most familiar adulation that takes place. Familiarity and consensus are inextricable from location, and location exists as it is discovered at arm's length. Standing where we are, the most interesting geographical perspective is not necessarily redundant, but terminus. Collectively, it is the bipolar edges of spindles that convince kinetochore activity, or it is histone or enzymatic recognition, which each depend on difference only foolproof denominators, namely dipoles in shared space, may compromise and exhibit. And no sooner have geographies been taken to mean referentially than have their discussions preconformed marginalia, the fringe. Their ingrate contrasts perform severe idealizations, but only as far away from the geographical as these can become, and as a result novel populations become sane to remember rhizomatically. However, these novel populations are beside the point of transcendence, which can only be achieved from this direction or around this direction, rather than that later direction. They are petty influences on the geographic agenda. As soon as the neighbor is looked upon, they are frozen to their spates and conflations, much like the non-anthropomorphized outcome of the Medusa effect. Such is the incorrigible grammar of geography. The neighbor is sempiternal and discomfited, without ease. They are invariably tied up with means production and do not desire to speak, and thus the call is short. By now the eyes are drawn down to geographical feet, that is, to borders, so as to recuse undue weight where the rope cannot hold. The geographical is, thus, a stalemate. So to break it, I am introducing another of my own personal academic concepts in this episode, namely that of the fissure. The fissure is intended to be a cardinal schizanalytic tool, but relatedly, for geographical sake, it is something that is overlaid atop traditional boundaries and self-described like a capture tool, just like conditions can be knotted and palpable during their extenuations and refinements. The fissure introduces at face value territories to be earmarked and, contrariwise, territories to be forbidden, whereas while the rhizomorph depersonalizes what it cannot see, the former becomes eternally disproportionate to the latter. The fissure permanently redefines the area, and like true rhizomatic connectomies, neither they nor their redefinitions are ever similar. For example, the American border with Canada will not be similar since the Vietnam War, with surfeit contingencies being magnified and overflowed, messily, at historical momenta. As well, the American border with Mexico exists within its own riparian ignorant notch, and the Russian border with the Ukraine is the difference between the European border with Africa and African borders with other African nations in that order of physical artifice. Respectively, these examples are contested and significantly sporadic conflictual, desperate and radicalized, and a combination of these qualities. However, these largely uninteresting common stance vitalities are spared their senses in and around their fissures, where binary between changes gather and transform indeterminate feed-forward tractations into collars, These collected collars are then injected and re-injected into the world like heroin ichor, intentionally to evaporate the cumbers of false and deplorable, that is, antagonistic distances. The American-Canadian border is daily crossed for myriad illegal and highly personal reasons. The American-Mexican border is itself a cross, and so forth. Apparently then the fissure speaks for itself, so long as it ramifies clearly and makes the message moot. But I will extemporize about Israeli borders with Arab nations to facilitate the meticulation of a fissure sui generis. Perhaps surprisingly, Israeli borders did not materialize at the same time that Israel did, to the extent you consider contemporaneous international climates, which is in contrast to the prevailing consensus about Israeli geopolitical practice. They returned to an existing place, yet the world believes Israel bullied its way into existence, and its picnic wars and Palestinian spats merely served to reinforce belief in a consumptive, maybe degenerative spirit guiding Israeli micromanagement. So do propounded stories and pop cultural motifs of renegade boats shipping human cargo, oppressive and slavish hostilities, and late-night incursions. Israel is practically made to seem like it was exchanged from thieves, a survivalist Trojan horse strung up, hammered, and shipped from the ether very lastly in the middle of the night. Combine that with Israeli militarism, its delicate and unforgiving rudiments, and you can see how the idea of a logical charity or reasonable proportionate geopolitical response or even value-ladenness, or religious incumbency, or morfati, or some combination thereof having consecutively preceded Israel can be, to some, difficult to concede. The public impression of the Israeli triumph is of a last-minute crusade, a negotiated hoax, or chicanery stashed and tolerated behind closed doors. That this should be the case when the Israeli pretense is entirely original as geography permits, reveals the paradoxical success at the height of nonsense. The Israeli fissure is an impressive ethological disaster, and it works. Alright, shameless plug. I'm the creator of an original, credible permutation of psychotherapy or talk therapy called somatic informatical therapy, with a strong influence owing to Deleuze and Guattari. You can purchase the guidebook on Amazon through the link in the description. It has good merit equally to academicians, clinicians, and laypeople, and I encourage you to purchase it particularly if you want to cite some of my ideas, including the Entelocius in an academic context. I also have a Patreon for anyone who is generous enough to contribute. That brings me to the border of episode 6. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, please click like and subscribe. I encourage opinions, discussion, and suggestions in the comments below, particularly if you know any rhizomatic scholars or theories deserving of attention or integration. Episode 7 is about strain and resistance. So, mind your path, raise your vision, reach your arms, and steal your sight. Rhizomatic transcendence is around the corner. See you again.